the beast Tamer. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly, where the Elko coal mines scarred the earth like a colossal gash. The scorching sun painted the barren land in shades of red, and the hot wind carried the acrid smell of metal and engine oil. In the center of the pit, Bagger 293, the world's largest mining machine, stood silent. 96 feet tall, weighing 14,200 tons, and valued at $100 million US, it once excavated thousands of tons of earth daily with its colossal bucket wheel system. But now, its mighty wheel was still, covered in red dust, like a sleeping giant. The roar that once echoed across the land was replaced by an eerie silence. Inside the makeshift maintenance shack, the air was thick with the frantic shouts and rapid clicking of keyboards. Young engineers, their shirts soaked with sweat, huddled around laptops, their screens flickering with chaotic data. "The system isn't responding," one yelled, his voice strained. "We've reset it 3 times. Red indicator lights on the control panel flashed relentlessly. Sarah Coleman, the project manager, stood in the corner, gripping her phone so tightly her nails dug into her palm. Her gray suit was rumpled after 2 sleepless nights, her eyes filled with worry. "We're losing millions of dollars every day it's down," she muttered. A $2 billion coal supply contract was just 24 hours away from a client inspection. If the machine didn't run, this mine would collapse. Outside the shack, workers gathered, their hard hats askew, faces smudged with coal dust. "If the machine doesn't run, the whole mine's toast," one said, his voice laced with panic. "They said AI would fix it, but look at us now," another sighed, leaning on a worn shovel. Skepticism spread, heavy as the dust coating their boots. An old, rattling pickup truck rumbled through the mine gate, kicking up a cloud of dust. Mike Harper, 68, stepped out, his worn, oil-stained jacket clinging to him, a small wrench glinting in his hand under the sun. His gray hair was disheveled, but his eyes were as sharp as a razor. Workers craned their necks, one muttering, "Who's that old guy?" A young engineer scoffed, hugging his laptop. "He probably thinks that wrench can fix Bagger 293. Laughter erupted, but it died down as Sarah walked over, her eyes lighting up. "Mike Harper," she said, her voice trembling. "The only person who can save us." Mike gave a slight nod, stepping into the shack, his every stride echoing on the dirt floor. He stopped before the hydraulic pump, the heart of Bagger 293, and tapped it with his wrench, a sharp clink reverberating. He closed his eyes, pressing his ear to the metal, as if listening to a secret only he understood. "Run it at 80% capacity," he said, his voice firm, "and absolute silence." Ethan Brooks, the chief engineer, his gelled hair perfectly slick, let out a grating laugh. 80%? With a wrench? Are you kidding? We've got $1 million AI here." Sarah raised a hand. "Do what he says." The machine roared to life, shaking the ground, the sound of metal grinding echoing throughout the mine. Mike stood motionless, wrench in hand, eyes fixed. The crowd held its breath. Could this man, with a simple tool, save the machine and his reputation? The muddy alley in Elko, Nevada, led to a dilapidated repair shop, where a faded wooden sign read, "Harper's Fixes." Inside, flickering neon lights illuminated piles of rusty tools, stacks of truck tires, and the mingled scent of engine oil and metal. A crackling AM radio played a melancholic 80s country song. Mike Harper, 68, sat on an old wooden chair, holding a lawnmower engine, his eyes as sharp as ever. His calloused fingers glided over the metal, tapping lightly as if playing a tune. "Stuck fuel valve, Tommy," he told the young boy standing nearby. "I'll handle it." The kid nodded, his eyes wide with admiration. To the mine workers, Mike was the man who brought machines back to life, whether it was a truck or a generator. But few knew he was once a top engineer at Caterpillar, having designed the hydraulic system for Bagger 293. Since he was 15, he had a knack for listening to machines, a strange vibration, An unusual rhythm was all it took for him to find the fault. In 2005, an unjust incident led to his termination, and his name was erased from the records. He returned to Elko, opened his garage, and lived quietly amidst wrenches and memories. Every night, he would sit and look at the old photograph on the wall, him, standing proudly in front of the machine, a radiant smile beside his design team, a reminder of the lost glory days. The phone rang, cutting through the song. Mike picked it up, his voice low. "Harper here." Sarah Coleman, her voice urgent. "Mike, the machine at the mine's dead. A huge contract's about to go belly up. You're our last hope." He fell silent, his gaze drifting to the photo. "I don't have my license anymore," he said, his voice dry. Sarah pleaded. "No one understands that machine like you do. Please." Wind swept through the garage door, carrying the distant scent of coal. Mike stood up, his shadow stretching long across the worn wooden floor. He walked to the photo, wiped off the dust, muttering, "They forgot me." But Sarah's voice echoed in his head, like a call from the past. He tightened his grip on the wrench, turned around, his eyes alight with determination, like a warrior preparing for battle. "All right," he said, as if to himself. "Send a car to pick me up." He grabbed his jacket, checked his wrench, and stepped outside. The muddy alley was quiet, only the whistling of the wind. A truck rolled up, its tires crunching on the red dirt. Mike got in, the door slammed shut, and the truck sped off, carrying him towards the coal mine, where the machine he once designed was waiting. He didn't know if he could save it, but he knew this was his chance to reclaim what he had lost. The wind blew harder, as if urging him forward. In the temporary office at the Elko mine, the dim light from a desk lamp illuminated Sarah Coleman's stressed face. Papers were stacked high on the table, system error reports piled up, yet not a single line explained why the machine had stopped. Outside the window, cracked earth stretched endlessly, the machine standing still like a phantom. Sarah gripped her phone tightly, her nails digging into her palm. She had just called Mike Harper, betting everything on a man the industry had turned its back on. "He's on his way," she told the engineering team, trying to hide her anxiety. Ethan Brooks, the young chief engineer, leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his gelled hair gleaming. He smirked. "An old car mechanic? Are you serious, Sarah? We have state-of-the-art million-dollar AI here." A few young engineers snickered, their eyes full of derision. Sarah glared at Ethan, her voice firm. "You haven't seen Mike work. I have." She remembered her internship days, when Mike taught her that machines weren't just steel and oil, they had their own voices. If you knew how to listen. The roar of a truck engine cut through the dusty air at the mine gate. Workers looked up. Some dropped their cigarettes, their eyes fixed on the old but sturdy vehicle. The door opened, and a silver-haired man stepped out, holding a wrench, small, compact, and almost unbelievably old-fashioned. "Mike Harper," a worker whispered. "Who's that guy?" Another replied with a faint laugh. "He supposedly fixes trucks, but this is Bagger 293 we're talking about." Mike said nothing. He walked slowly across the red-dusted yard, his oil-stained shoes leaving clear prints on the concrete. The air seemed to thicken. As he entered the maintenance shack, the flickering neon lights reflected in his deep-set eyes. The young engineers turned to look, a few letting out mocking laughs. But Sarah Coleman, the project manager, her eyes lit up, almost unable to hide her relief. "Mike Harper," she called, her voice clear. "Thank you for coming." Ethan Brooks, the chief engineer, braced his hands on the table, his voice sharp. "Seriously? We're in the middle of a high-level AI diagnostic and you call in an old man?" Mike simply held up his wrench, shaking it slightly. "Did your AI find the problem?" Ethan faltered for a second, then replied, "We scanned the entire electrical system. No leaks. Pump pressure within limits. Recirculation valve stable. Vibration sensors all green. But the bucket wheel still won't rotate after 27 seconds of startup." "And the hydraulic system?" Mike asked. We replaced the filters, reset the controls, updated the firmware. No issues detected. Sarah interjected, her voice calm. We only have 12 hours left before the inspection team arrives. If the machine isn't operating at 80% capacity, that $2 billion contract will go to our competitor. Mike nodded, his gaze resting on the control panel displaying a series of fluctuating parameters. Data doesn't say anything when it doesn't sing. Ethan scoffed. It's a machine, not a musical instrument. Mike didn't reply, just turned to Sarah. I need control. And absolute silence in the shack. Sarah nodded. Understood. Ethan sighed, exasperated. We've used neural networks to identify abnormal signals. You think a wrench will do what we couldn't? Mike simply nodded slightly. Give me 5 minutes. If I don't find it, I'm leaving. Silence fell over the shack. Mike walked slowly to the main hydraulic pump, the heart of Bagger 293, where dozens of engineers had inspected it for the past 2 days. Some moved aside. A young engineer quietly said, "What's he actually going to do?" Sarah didn't answer. She just quietly clutched the error log. The 27 seconds circled in red. Mike crouched beside the pump, tapping the steel casing lightly with his wrench. Clink! A sharp, clear sound resonated. He tilted his head, closed his eyes, pressing his ear to the surface as if listening to a broken melody. 1 beat, 2 beats. His eyes slowly narrowed. Spinning too early, he mumbled. Sound overlapping the background. There's an alignment issue. Sarah stood a few feet away, clutching a stack of papers, her nails digging into her palm. Her eyes flickered between worry and hope, like a chess player making a desperate final move. She remembered her internship days, when Mike taught her that machines weren't just steel and oil, they had their own voices. If you knew how to listen. Ethan Brooks, leaning against a table full of laptops, a sneer still on his lips, though his eyes had begun to waver. "Mr. Harper, are you done yet?" Ethan said, his voice sharp as a blade. "We scanned sensors all night, ran the AI ragged. Checked alignment this morning, it was off by less than 0.005 millimeters. You think that wrench will find something we didn't?" He gestured to the laptop screen where data curves flickered, like an unsolved riddle. Mike stood up, his eyes still fixed on the machine. "You checked it when it was static. I hear it when it's running." Sarah asked gently, "What do you need?" "Run the pump for 30 seconds in startup mode. Then increase to 80% for 10 seconds. Then stop." Ethan's eyes widened. "There's no test like that. Do you know if there really is an alignment issue? The pressure will destroy the return line." Mike turned back, his gaze firm. "And if I'm right, you're trying to patch up a broken arm without an X-ray." Sarah turned to Ethan decisively. "Do what he says." Ethan shook his head, his face flushed, but reluctantly gestured to the operating team. A young engineer pressed the button, and the machine roared to life, shaking the shack floor like a minor earthquake. The bucket wheel outside turned slowly, the metal grinding and echoing throughout the mine. Mike stood motionless, clutching his wrench, his eyes fixed on the pump, as if he could see through the thick steel. 10 seconds passed. The air in the shack seemed to halt. Only the engine's roar and everyone's ragged breathing could be heard. Suddenly Mike raised his hand, his voice cutting through. "Stop!" The machine fell silent. Everyone's eyes were fixed on him. There's an abnormal resonance that appeared right after the 18-second mark. A high-frequency oscillation is misaligning the main shaft from the inside. The main pump is off-axis by 0.02 millimeters. Ethan's eyes widened. He stepped forward, pointing at Mike. 0.02 millimeters? You're making that up. The AI didn't see anything. He turned to Sarah, his voice snapping. "You're letting this guy waste our time?" Mike pulled out a piece of paper, sketching a hand-drawn diagram of the return shaft and stress points. "It's possible the contact surface between the control pump and the minor shaft is unevenly worn. When the temperature rises, the shaft expands slightly, creating a microdeviation, something current sensors can't measure. The entire shack fell silent. Sarah looked at him, stunned. You're sure? Mike nodded. This is the voice I heard from it. I'm not guessing. Sarah took a deep breath. Okay, have the contact surface rechecked with manual sensors according to Mike's instructions. If he's right, we just won a critical gamble. A young engineer pulled out a handheld device, starting to scan the pump. The screen showed a small curve, an alignment issue, just as Mike had said. The shack fell silent. Only the soft tick-tick of the device could be heard. Ethan stood frozen, his mouth agape, his eyes wavering as if he'd just been defeated. Sarah covered her mouth, her eyes shining as if she'd witnessed a miracle. Workers standing around, a few mumbling, "He really was right." Ethan let out a breath, but this time, there was no sarcasm. He stepped back, looking at Mike as if meeting a version of mechanical engineering he'd considered obsolete, but perhaps still more accurate than any AI. Mike just stood still, wrench held tight in his hand. Not like a mechanic, but like someone listening to the heart of a beast he had once created. And this time, he wasn't going to let it roar alone. The mine's maintenance shack was bathed in the dim light of overhead lamps, which swayed gently, casting shadows onto the oil-stained concrete floor. The hum of the ceiling fan mingled with the rapid breathing of the young engineering team, huddled around the massive hydraulic pump, the heart of the mining machine. They looked at him, their eyes a mix of doubt and curiosity, as if waiting to see what he would do next. Sarah Coleman clutched a pen, her nails digging into her palm. She glanced at the wall clock, only 10 hours left before the client inspection. "Mike, what do we need?" she asked, her voice slightly trembling but full of hope. Mike replied, his voice deep and decisive, "A laser alignment tool. Get it now." A young engineer, sweat beading on his forehead, rushed into the tool shed, pulling out a metal box. Inside was a small laser device, its red light blinking like the eye of a predator. He set it on the floor, his hands shaking as he connected the cables. Mike knelt down, pointing to the pump. "Shine the laser directly on the main shaft. A 0.02 millimeter deviation is enough to damage the machine if it's not fixed immediately." The engineering team began to work, the laser light tracing red lines across the metal surface, like a fragile web holding the entire mine from collapse. Mike commanded, his voice calm but unyielding, "Slowly, move the shaft millimeter by millimeter. One wrong move, we lose everything." The engineers, though still skeptical, followed his instructions, their hands trembling slightly under the pressure. One mumbled, "Is this really going to work?" Ethan Brooks, standing a few feet away, arms crossed, his eyes still arrogant but now wavering. "You sure this laser will fix it?" he asked, trying to maintain his mocking tone. Mike didn't turn around, simply replied, "You want the machine to run, then do exactly as I say." Ethan grunted softly but didn't argue further, his eyes fixed on the blinking laser. Suddenly, a faint crack echoed from the pump, like a bone breaking in the silence. The whole team flinched. A young engineer blurted out, "Damn it, what was that?" Sarah covered her mouth, her eyes wide. Mike raised his hand, his voice reassuring, "Calm down, the shaft is settling into place." He ordered them to continue, the laser blinking, each millimeter carefully aligned. The air in the shack seemed to freeze, only the tick-tick of the device and rapid breathing could be heard. Sarah bit her lip, her eyes locked on Mike, as if he were a lighthouse in a storm. After 30 intense minutes, sweat pouring down the engineers' foreheads, Mike stood straight, nodding, "Done. Start the machine 80% capacity." Ethan shook his head, muttering, "If it breaks, don't blame me." Sarah gave the order, her voice decisive, "Do it." An engineer pressed the button, and the machine roared to life, shaking the entire shack. The bucket wheel outside spun faster, dirt and rocks pouring onto the conveyor belt like a waterfall. Indicator lights on the control panel flashed, then turned green. An engineer yelled, "It's running!" Sarah covered her mouth, her eyes glistening, as if she wanted to cry. Workers outside the shack cheered, applause erupting like thunder. Ethan stood frozen, his eyes wavering, shifting from arrogance to embarrassment. He stepped forward, his voice softer. You really did it." Mike wiped his hands on his jacket, his eyes showing no triumph, only the confidence of someone who knew his worth. But Sarah knew this victory was just the beginning. The clock was still ticking, and the machine needed to stabilize before the client arrived. The mine's makeshift conference room was bathed in the warm, yellow glow of an old desk lamp, illuminating the drab gray steel walls. Mike Harper stood quietly in the corner, his hands tucked into the pockets of his worn jacket, his small wrench nestled there like a silent friend. Sarah approached, her voice clear but slightly shaky. "Mike, this is an official apology from the company. We were wrong to blame you all those years ago. Today you saved this entire project." She handed him a plaque of honor, inscribed with Outstanding Engineer Michael Harper. The engineers applauded, the sound echoing, a bit awkward, as if they were unaccustomed to acknowledging someone they had once mocked. Ethan Brooks, standing near the door, phone in hand, his fingers rapidly swiping across the screen. He cleared his throat, stepping forward, his voice low but sincere. "Mr. Harper, I was wrong. I posted about how you fixed the machine. The hashtag #BeastTamer is trending everywhere." He paused, avoiding Mike's gaze, as if ashamed of his earlier sarcasm. Mike gave a slight nod, saying nothing, his eyes showing no resentment, as if an apology wasn't what he needed to move forward. Sarah smiled, her voice warming. "Mike, the company wants to offer you a position as a technical consultant. We need someone like you." She paused, awaiting his reaction. Mike looked out the window, where the setting sun cast long shadows over the barren land. "I'll think about it," he said, his voice deep, neither promising nor refusing. A young engineer, still holding his tablet, approached, hesitant. "Mr. Harper, how did you know the pump was the problem? We scanned all night and found nothing." Mike pulled out his wrench, tapping it lightly on his hand, a sharp clink echoing like an answer. "Machines have voices. You just have to listen." Workers outside the door began raising their phones, taking pictures, a buzz of murmurs filling the air. "This old man's a legend." Sarah looked at Mike, her eyes shining with respect. "You didn't just save the machine, Mike. You reminded us that experience is irreplaceable." Mike stepped out of the room, his shadow stretching long across the floor. He stopped, clutching his wrench tightly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Today he had proven something, not just to the mine but to himself. Mike Harper's repair shop stood silently in the small alley in Elko, Nevada, where the sunset light filtered through the cracked window, casting dusty beams onto shelves of tools. The crackling AM radio played a melancholic country song, as if pulling him back to old days. Mike walked in, his worn, dust-covered jacket still carrying the mine's grit, his old wrench in hand. He stopped, his gaze sweeping over the familiar space, where he had lived quietly for 2 decades, fixing trucks and farm equipment to forget a past when the industry cast him aside. He walked to the stained wall, where an old, dusty photograph hung crookedly. It was him, younger, standing proudly in front of the colossal mining machine, a radiant smile beside his design team. His calloused fingers touched the frame, wiping away the dust, as if clinging to a piece of memory. 20 years, he mumbled, his voice hoarse. He remembered the long nights in the garage, listening to the hum of machines, and today, that very machine roared back to life under his touch, as if atoning for the injustice of years past. Mike sat down on the creaky wooden chair, took out his wrench, and gently spun it in his hand. "You're still here," he said, as if talking to an old friend. Today, he hadn't just fixed a machine, he had fixed his honor. He straightened the picture, his eyes showing a quiet satisfaction. Wind swept through the door, carrying the distant scent of metal. Mike picked up an old engine, tapping it lightly, as if beginning a new chapter in his life. The red glow of the sunset painted the Nevada desert, where the colossal mining machine roared, its bucket wheel turning steadily, throwing earth and rock onto the conveyor belt like an endless waterfall. The engine's rumble shook the ground, like the heartbeat of a revived giant. Workers were scattered across the hills, their hard hats askew, their eyes fixed on each excavation, as if witnessing a miracle. Mike Harper, 68, stood on a small mound, his worn jacket fluttering in the wind, his hands in his pockets, his gaze contemplative. He said nothing, just quietly observed the machine, his brainchild, designed 20 years ago, now operating powerfully, saving the coal supply contract from the brink of collapse. Sarah Coleman approached, her suit rumpled, her eyes shining. "Mike, you did the impossible." He nodded slightly, his voice low. It just needed to be listened to. Mike's story isn't just about a machine. It's a lesson in the power of experience, about believing in yourself when doubted. With an old wrench, he proved that talent never goes out of style. Think about a time you overcame a challenge, proving your worth. Mike's story is spreading on social media. The hashtag #BeastTamer is exploding. A worker posted a video, yelling, "Mr. Harper saved this mine." A young engineer wrote, "I learned that machines have voices." From Elko, Mike's legacy inspires, reminding us that true talent is never forgotten.